Everyone, welcome to Community Roots. Yeah, I dig it.
Everyone think there's 1,000 people that are listening right now. So you
Are
got your
we
energy
ready
up.
to rumble?
In one corner, we have good mental health practices. In the other, the
Life.
Adapted Adolescent.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome, everyone, to Community Roots, a place that we gather in community to talk about mental health so we can travel the journey of life together. I'm Samuel Richards.
I'm Julie Richards.
I'm Sarah Wakefield.
And yes, as we were kind of teasering a little bit earlier, we're going to talk about a couple different types of ego states, the wounded child, the adapted adolescent, and the functional adult. We're looking to continue to build off where we've been working with season 3, kind of talking about this coming back to home base. And these ego states are kind of how we deal and cope with things. So I'm excited for this. I've wanted to dive into this for a while. It kind of feels, a little bit like I'm in college and we're studying for a test, and this is the
there will be a
note
pop
cards.
quiz.
Right, exactly.
How much do you remember from seasons 1 and 2, where we have talked
Right.
about Pia Melody before, and we are bringing her back?
I dig it. Pia Melody back for season 3. I mean, it wouldn't be a season without Pia Melody. It wouldn't be an episode.
It wouldn't be an episode.
Yeah.
She's done some very transformative work for people. I think she's got a very helpful lens model to understand ourselves. As this season we've been talking about how to be a healthy human and what does it look like to come back to home base. And I think it's just very powerful how she conceptualizes it, because it gives you a little bit of a pathway, which is part of our name, Community Roots, that pathway to mental health, so that you can kind of have some signposts or something to, how do I know where I am? Am I in a good place, or am I struggling? Or sometimes we're aware that we're struggling, but we don't know how to articulate or put words to it or find a pathway through it so we don't just stay stuck. And I think her model really does an excellent job of giving us the path and some ways to connect in and say, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see this. I can see it in myself. I can see it in humans that I'm relating with. And it helps untangle some of the ambiguity and complexity of being human. So you can tell I believe in this model. You can tell that it is something that has been transformative for me.
If this is your first episode, get ready.
Yeah. There you go.
It's more Pia Melody. So sweet. Yeah, let's dive into it. I'm excited for it.
So when we're talking about ego states, what that means, we've talked earlier in this season about our littles that we credit LaShonda Sugg for, like internally our inner child, our parts of us that make up the layers of who we are as a person. And these layers, according to Pia Melody, is able to be conceptualized with a functional adult, which is the essence of who you are as a mature, functioning human in the world. And then we have these stunted parts that are the wounded child or the adapted adolescent. And when she talks about these, she's referring to younger parts within us that may have developed at specific ages, of like a wounded child being 0 to 5 or sometimes 0 to 7. It's our earliest woundings. It's also where we had very young attachment needs, that just in being human, we have a need to be seen and heard and have our needs met. And it tends to be a very young part that's in need of nurture. So it's our most wounded part of ourself. and psychologically what's happening with that wounded child is we have this fear of not mattering. We don't really have a sense of self. We don't know who we are. It's very young and stunted. And then the adapted adolescent being more of the 6 or 7-year-old up to age 17 is where she kind of conceptualized her model. Since then, with the understanding of neuroscience that we have in the 1990s, this model of hers dates back into the 1980s. So we're able to know that the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is where our functional adult dwells, that doesn't even develop fully until age 25. For some, it's even up to 30. And so really, I think this model could be expanded upon to say that adapted adolescent could go into early 20s as well. But that's kind of what she calls a false self, like that it doesn't have reality. It's more stunted or immature in the ways that it tries to cope. And the adapted adolescent is actually trying to handle, cope, or parent the wounds of the wounded child. It just doesn't know how to do that in a functional way. And so then when we have the functional adult, that part is able to take charge and have authenticity and not these false beliefs. It's getting to the essence of who we are. It's more differentiated. And that part is, as we're healing, growing, developing, hopefully that is the part that we keep online more and more often, that we could be aware where we're sliding during the day into our wounded child or adapted adolescent, and we're able to kind of breathe into that, make adjustments, and look at how we can become more functional personally and relationally.
So Julie, I'm taking away from this that you can also, these states are fluid. Hopefully we're spending more time in functional adult.
Right.
But as my gratitude will show, it's easy to slide in between these wounded children and adapted adolescent stages. What if someone as a youth, say you're under age 25 or around thereabouts, and people continue to remark to you that you are mature for your age. Are you actually mature for your age, or are you is it possible to be a functional adult as a younger person? And if not, because of that prefrontal cortex development, is that an indication of maybe some trauma, some imbalance of mental health? I don't know how to put that.
Well, I think what comes to mind as you're describing it are the streams that we've talked before, like within attachment, that you can have streams of functional adult, because it's not like you wake up on your 25th birthday and your prefrontal cortex, ding, like your brain has arrived online. It's like we have streams of that we are cultivating even as we're raising children, whether we're parenting our own children or we're reparenting these young parts within us. So those layers and those streams are developing. They're just not fully developed until later. I would say that some people were forced to function or overfunction at a very early age. And that's why someone will say they have an old soul, or they're so responsible, or they've always been so mature, but they may have neglected and not been able to have a wounded child or a self that has needs. They had to take care of everybody else. So they became more of the role of a hero. We would say that the role in the family would be like a hero, that they were falsely empowered, because it was you're just amazing the way you are and you don't need anybody. And that's not an accurate, healthy view of self. They may have just some good wisdom from having to learn the hard way. So I think there could be streams and layers of that as well. But it's have they really had someone who was able to mirror back to them who they are, and so that they could be seen and heard, or did they just have to overfunction?
I also hear you saying we could spend time, it's healthy to spend time as you're growing up in these ego states. You do have to experience wounded child. You do have to experience adapted adolescent.
Yeah, totally valid. This is it's a developmental model, and it's based on attachment needs that are being met. And to go back to the places where the needs weren't met before. Like we have more covert, like needs are lacking. We have holes and gaps, so we can go back, because going through the first time as a young child, 0 to 7, or an adolescent that's older, we weren't necessarily always connected and attuned with and having our needs met. And so, yes, we're literally working out these ages as we live them biologically. But as we're trying to make sense of them as an adult who's trying to reparent and heal themselves, we're kind of looking conceptually at those different ages and stages. So we do kind of this reparenting concept that we're trying to go back, reflect back on where we've had dysfunction in these younger, immature ego states, that they got stuck, or development got derailed a little bit because of life or lack of support or trauma that has occurred. So we do this trauma work to help us kind of be more present, be more able to meet the needs, and kind of reduce some of the reactivity that happens when we're in our wounded child or our adapted adolescent. Both of those extremes we could visualize on a continuum: wounded child on one end, adapted adolescent on the other. Just like if you're driving down the road and you get a little bit off path and you overcompensate, you swing to the other side. What we're looking for as a functional adult is to be balanced and moderate in the middle. So we have to explore, how do we bring that functional adult on board and stay more present? So therefore, the job of the functional adult is to parent or reparent the wounded child, not in the way that the adapted adolescent has, but in a functional way. And sometimes the adapted adolescent needs those limits and boundaries and being taught and reparented as well. So we can go through like each of these a little bit in more detail as we talk about the parts work, just to give more of a framework for how
that sounds good.
wounded child feels.
Yeah, I know the first thing that I thought, as we often go through these things, is where do I fit into this? Or what have I been experiencing in this? And I think it would be good to break these down. And then I agree, Mom. I think it's good to focus on the reparenting and the functional adult as well. I feel like we'll probably spend most of our time talking about the wounded child and the adapted adolescent, but I know we're looking to talk about what that repairing and reparenting looks like. And so I think this is a good time to reflect on that spectrum, like where do I fit in, or like what we talked about earlier, like what times am I feeling the wounded child versus what times am I feeling the adapted adolescent, and what do I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on. But yeah, because I'm looking through some of these, I skipped ahead a couple slides. And yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I'll let Mom lead us through kind of the wounded child and the adapted adolescent, but I know it's brought up a couple things for me too.
So the wounded child is a very young, vulnerable, kind of a needy state. People tend to feel very overwhelming and intense feelings, more abandoned or suffocated, needy, kind of insatiable. They have a lot of wants and they have no boundaries. They tend to feel, and in Pia's language, it's less than or worthless. There's a fear of not mattering. So it's young and needy, basically. Intense, I would say, in that way.
When you see like a child, like okay, so I'm trying to picture this happening. Like a physical representation, or like, and I'm picturing this kid in the grocery store having his meltdown or her meltdown. I don't know where I'm going with this question, but I think it has to do with identifying that as an adult, what these things look like. And I think I can feel every single one of these things as an adult.
Mhm. And particularly when we're feeling vulnerable, worn out, stressed out. We've used that acronym HALTS before: hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed, or scared. Yeah, those really emotional, I would say right-brained, limbic brain, our flipped lid kind of thing. All of those are coming from, I've got needs right now. And this is not to say that those needs are not legitimate, because they are. Like, it's human nature to have needs. And so it could be a dysregulation, like your example in the grocery store. It could be that that person has not had sleep or nutrients or hydration, or feels ignored or unsupported. That's going to make the needs louder so that they can get met. The needs are trying to get met. And they don't, at that age, they don't have more of a regulating capacity where they can calm themselves down. They need support from an external co-regulator who can help them feel seen and breathe and help the needs get met, to help them understand like what's missing. How can I get back into what we've called like a green pathway, a ventral vagal pathway in polyvagal terms, of like, I feel okay again. A lot of the times those things are dysregulation caused by basic needs that aren't being met currently, or it could be our sensory processing is highly attuned. So like noises are particularly irritating. Our focus is distracted because of could be sensory needs or sensitivities to sounds, fabrics, any way that we have a sensory input could be out of balance. We could be needing more sensory input. We could be needing less sensory input. All of that is impacting how our body is able to regulate or feel okay, or if it doesn't feel okay.
I definitely think as an adult, I feel all of these things. Obviously, as an adult, I feel all of these things. But as an adult, I don't allow myself to identify these things. I don't allow myself, well, I shouldn't feel lonely. I have people around me. I shouldn't feel less than. Look at all my accomplishments. I shouldn't all over myself. And I'm just looking at this list, needy or insatiable, suffocated, abandoned, less than worthless, overwhelming, intense feelings, fear of not mattering. And I wonder, it just seems to me that I know of a lot of adults, including myself, 100%. I tend to stuff that down and not even address them, not pay attention that I have needs that need to be met at that basic level.
I think that's interesting, because I wanted to say that I actually feel like I have a good grip on my wounded child. And I think that I ask some of the same things, or go through the same kind of internal dialogue, in terms of if I do feel abandoned, being able to self-talk or say, hey, what do I like to do by myself or something. So I definitely see, like, we all feel it. And I wonder, like, we're not going to avoid feeling these things.
Right.
We'll just have the indicators that say, hey, we are feeling these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then how to be able to react to those things.
Or respond like in a functional way. Like, how can I? So when you're coaching yourself or you're encouraging yourself, as long as it's not a complete dismissal of what you are feeling, if it's a way of kind of coming alongside and bringing in that wounded child to say, hey, buddy, I got you. Like, I can help you. We're in this together. Kind of like when we've talked about talking to your amygdala and saying like, hey, you're looking out for me. Thanks for looking out for me to try to keep me safe. So when you kind of befriend your nervous system, then you're able to respond in a supportive way. That's your functional adult coming online to help yourself cope. So that's a very functional thing to do. If you say, and like Sarah, what you're talking about is kind of the shoulding or shaming on ourselves, where it likely was hard to have those needs because they maybe weren't given room or space when you're growing up, that there's not somebody there to mirror back and say, of course you need this from me, and I want to be there for you, and I want to support you and offer you something that you're needing. We don't have a culture that really knows how to do that or has done that. I don't think necessarily very well as a whole. I'm not saying it hasn't happened in moments of connected relationships and healthy relationships, but it's kind of
I can see that.
a learning curve, maybe, until we're able to have a language for it and to model it and to do that, to pass that on to the next generation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you can see just even in the verbiage of how we're talking about wounded child, how we react different or cope with it differently. I am interested about this adapted teenager because that's interesting to me. And we can go through the list here. And I was also curious, like, well, why does the transfer happen? What happens that, and maybe we can talk about this in a second, but you'll see that wounded child is very, kind of becoming louder in order to feel like you need attention. And the adapted teenager kind of feels like a different vibe. I'll let you go through it, but that was just one of the questions.
Yeah, there's a shift that happens that I think Pia has conceptualized in a really creative and meaningful way, to say that the adapted teenager has the behavior to try and parent the feelings of the wounded child. Like, what do we do with all these feelings that this wounded child has? This feelings of being overwhelmed or being abandoned. So now what do I do with that? That's where she brings in the adapted adolescent or teenager to say, that's my response to the big overloaded emotion and neediness. Like, how am I going to
I can totally see that. Yeah, if you look in the wounded child, I mean, overwhelming, abandoned, suffocated, like needy, these things, like, and we've talked about this before. Whenever you are a kid, whenever your emotions start going on, they start to overwhelm your frontal lobe, like the back of your brain where you're having your emotions are actually the thing that's going on. So they can't even think about that higher stuff. And it feels like the adapted teenager kind of has the consciousness that they're feeling something. And like you said, this is how I'm reacting to it instead.
Trying to cope.
Yeah, let's go through this. This is a good list.
Yeah, trying to cope. What can I do to respond? But they don't have the maturity yet. So as I described that continuum, we've got the one extreme where the wounded child is. Imagine overcompensating to try to help fix it, so to speak, or solve the problem. So sometimes the way an adapted adolescent would cope with their behavior is to become very critical and attacking or superior. So Pia would call that being better than or going one up. It might be very demanding. They could shut down any needs at all, and they would be needless, wantless. Like, I don't want to have needs because I'm going to get hurt. So I'm going to kind of like restrain or contain myself further. Like, I'll do it myself. I'll be highly responsible and independent, which can be taken to an extreme and not a healthy thing, even though our culture kind of values that. It could be how each person interacts, and it could be in our various relationships. It could be our personality styles. It could be on either extreme of I'm either out of control and rebellious, or I'm having too much control, or I can be good and perfect, or I could be bad and rebellious. I could be really responsible, overly so, or I could be irresponsible. And in some ways I could put up walls that like abandon and neglect others because I don't want to deal with it. I'm just going to shut it down. I'm going to close off and I'm going to put up walls. Or it could just have really damaged boundaries that it doesn't know, because the wounded child has no boundaries. It's saying, I don't know how to cope with any of this. So there could be a convoluted mess of boundaries.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You can see a lot here. I also noticed some of these things on the list is things that we support in our society or something that's seen as a positive. like critical or attacking, that can be seen as a sign of strength, or indulging is on this list. Which, how many like retail shopper or like retail therapy stickers have I seen? And every time I'm like, oh no. It's
I think
it's
I think
interesting.
it's maybe I don't know where I've seen critical or attacking as a positive thing in our culture, but normalized in our culture for sure. Like
That's fair.
what what's wrong with the fact that I was yelled at as a child, because everybody yells at their kids or something like
Mhm.
that. They don't, it's just like, well, everybody does that. And how PR responds to that is to say it can be common and normalized, but it doesn't make it functional.
Makes
It's like
sense.
we've acclimated to it as a society as, oh, that's normal to be that way. Or people think if we think of behavior modification, which I talked a little bit about this on the Unpack That in our last episode, behavior modification is I want you to conform and comply to a standard. And so how some people have tried to accomplish that is by being critical or by being attacking, like you need to look at it this way. You should be doing it this way. Your behavior should look like this, which is where in this adapted adolescent list, it comes in being too controlling. You're trying to control something else. Why? Because you don't like that behavior. And so you want to squelch it and stop it and like, don't do that kind of thing. And so we can even see how parents or teachers or systems can interpret behavior as sometimes disrespectful or
definitely
disobedient, or and they'll interpret this behavior in a way that they put judgment on it instead of just noticing that the behavior is an outward sign of what's happening internally, like their unrest, their dysregulation, their immaturity, maybe lack of skills. All of that creates behavior that
outside
just lets
of their
us
window.
know they're outside their window, right? Which
No,
I'm
I
glad
can
you brought
definitely
up.
see that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up about the window of tolerance, because as we conceptualize these parts, these ego states, inside the window of tolerance would be our functional adult. That's where we can handle the ebb and flow, the challenges, the stressors.
Yeah, makes sense.
The red pathway hyperarousal or the blue pathway hypoarousal are both aspects of, we could conceptualize those as the adapted adolescent, and the wounded child is kind of that wounded child being kind of blue pathway that shut down. I'm collapsed. I feel worthless. I'm less than. And the red pathway adapted adolescent is more of a, I'm superior. I've got all this energy or rage or anger, or like, I'm going to, control the world or whatever. Like it's, what do I do with all that? Being upset by things or angry or anxious, or so that would maybe be more of the red pathway. And what we're working to grow in maturity and healing is to widen that window, become more of a functional adult who can be in the green pathway.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then, I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, I would encourage people to go back to our window of tolerance, because we actually talk about returning to the window of tolerance. So if you feel like something with your wounded child or adapted teenager has kind of brought you outside or continually brings you, we kind of go into that. So let's talk a little bit more about, that green area in the middle, or the functional adult.
Yeah. So the functional adult, and when we do this parts work, we call it, we're wanting to reparent or heal. And so we look at what are the behaviors that would be more mature, more functional, more developed, more present and attuned to meet the needs, because that wounded child and truly the adapted adolescent have legitimate needs. They need their needs to be met in a way that's more attuned and more nurturing and more functional. So the way that's accomplished is through self-love, being affirming and nurturing, being accountable, having boundaries that have containment with our talking boundary. And we're going to do a whole episode to kind of review our boundary things that we've talked about before. We're able to contain ourselves. We're also able to protect ourselves with our boundaries so that we can be both connected with others in a healthy, balanced way, and also protected. The functional adult has moderation and balance, like on that continuum that I mentioned earlier. The functional adult is in the middle. It has interdependence, which means that it's okay to need each other. It's okay to ask for and also give support in mutual ways, which, of course, I'm talking about in adult relationships. I'm not talking about the kids meeting the needs of the parent. That's not appropriate. That would be a form of abuse. So I'm talking about having healthy relationships in our adult life that we can have mutuality. And the functional adult is present. It's in the present, not being driven by our unconscious dynamics from the past or things that are unresolved that are like sweeping us away into our wounded child or adapted adolescent. They're able to be mindful and non-judgmental, like to able just observe in that moment. And then they're able to take care of their needs and wants in appropriate ways that they can ask for what they need. They have a variety of places that their needs can get met so that they're not flooding and overwhelming one particular relationship. They're both able to take care of themselves, but also ask for others for support when that's needed.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it sounds like, I mean, if I'm understanding this correctly, we tend to slide between the three, and it's just kind of about returning to home base. There we go, using that term again.
Yeah. Well,
But
and that concept with like meditation that we've talked about, like you forget and then you remember, you get off track and then you come back. Same thing with this, like you have the awareness that, okay, I'm outside my window right now. I'm in my wounded child, or I'm in my adapted adolescent. I'm in that red pathway, or I'm in that blue pathway. So how do I bring in more streams of green pathway of functional adult? It's not clear cut boxes like jump from one to the next, but it's like, how do I give myself more support? How do I regulate my nervous system using my breath, using hydration, using rest, using movement, exercise, having supportive relationships, the things that will help bring my functional adult online so that I can spend more time in that window of tolerance.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think it's so helpful to know that we are going to flip between the three. Like earlier, whenever Sarah mentioned that, I'm going to write down the time. Okay, let me get back my train. So earlier, this reminds me of whenever Sarah kind of talked about, can people with undeveloped brains still have functional adults? I mean, still have, and I think that we've answered that yes, people who haven't fully developed can still have waves of that functional adult, ways that they've learned things clearly. But I also think it comes with a misconception too, that kind of there is a click, like you're a functional adult, and then that's what you are. And I think it's so helpful to know that, and learning this growing up more and more, that there is no switch. It's constant, maintenance, making sure things are good, and keeping up on that stuff. So I think that's hopeful as well. So whenever I feel myself going into one of those states, not beating myself up for essentially not being perfect.
Right. That's fair. I think the image that comes to mind for me as you're describing that we've equated it to before is building a muscle. When you go to work out at the gym, you can't just automatically lift these heavy pound weights. You're gradually working your way up. You're building a new muscle. And some days you show up and it feels pretty easy and you're like, I'm in a good place and I feel really strong. Other days you show up and you're like, I'm exhausted and I hate exercise and I don't want to do this.
I am wiped out. I've been there.
Yeah. So I think it is that it's just a little bit of all the parts are welcome, right? It's like I am developing, I'm growing, I'm learning. All of those are process kinds of words. It's not that I've arrived. It's not that I've accomplished the functional adult or something like that. It's more like these streams that I'm learning and growing, and it's a process that happens across the lifespan. I can know more today than I knew a year ago. Or it's the day-to-day, you called it maintenance, which makes a lot of sense because it's like you're doing the work of investing in that's what the self-love is I'm going to be nurturing and kind and gentle to myself because I'm precious and valuable, not because I'm the only one in the world that's that way, but because I treat myself like humans. We're same as you're precious and valuable and I'm precious and valuable. And so these are ways that we can relate in the world that are kind and nurturing and gentle and not harsh and critical. We need to bring in that self-compassion, which goes back to what you were saying, Sarah, about the shoulds. I shouldn't feel this way. Agreed. I shouldn't do this or whatever, that it's okay to have the needs. It's okay to nurture those needs.
Yeah, I dig it. I think that's awesome. I think that we've covered a lot today. And I always love whenever we can connect that back to an older episode or something like our window of tolerance episode. So, and I also love this season, how we're able to build off these ideas. So both of those are good things to look into. Well, as we kind of wrap up, we tend to end with gratitudes and affirmations and stuff. And I always love them to sprinkle them in, but I like that we add them in on the end as well. So, yeah, Sarah, you want to go first?
So I just wanted to say that I am grateful for my vacation I got to go on earlier, where I went out to California and visited my sister. And I took a couple solo hikes by myself, and I think I experienced all of the ego states in my hikes.
What a great reflection.
I know. Thank you.
I'm impressed.
I had a couple hikes that I think were definitely, well, let me start off with the one hike that was a wounded child hike, because that one, I definitely had overwhelming feelings that just, I mean, I was surrounded by gnats and flies on this one trip that was supposed to be this hike. It was supposed to be beautiful and along a river. And I had gnats like all over my sunglasses. I had flies in my ears, and I am going along this path, like yelling at these gnats and flies constantly. And I just got so angry and I was like overwhelmed. And I'm again by myself on this hike, and there's no getting away from these gnats and flies. And I have my trekking poles and I'm flailing them around. I mean, if I could have been on the ground rolling around having a tantrum, that's how it would have evidenced itself. But I had that hike, and then I had another hike where I just wanted to be done. I was feeling, I don't know, like I got irritated. I was thinking this was a dumb hike. I was like, this needs to be done. I'm so tired of climbing to the tops of these mountains. And I had to I don't know, I just found myself in this adapted teenager state over and over again. And I finally pulled back on both occasions, on both of these hikes that were less than ideal. I pulled back and I actually said to myself, like, I am behaving like not a functional adult. Like I wasn't very present with my body. I just wanted, I was taking note of all the things that were bothering me, but I wasn't really reflecting and being non-judgmental. I was just like very much like, I can't believe I went out here to do this thing. And I don't know if that's making sense or not, but I finally started pulling in and taking care of my needs. Like, okay, Sarah, why don't we stop and have some water? Why don't we stop and just take a moment, and do you need like a snack? And because I just kept pushing myself on these hikes, and I just kept, no, I'm just going to get it later.
Do you need some trail mix?
Exactly. And I even thought of that later about how I could have used trail mix on the way. But anyway, it ended up, I calmed down. I let myself have a fit. I'm like, you can have 5 seconds of a fit and like, get it out. What's going on here?
5 seconds. That's all you got.
Well, the gnats were really bad. And so I did have to set a time frame, but I even also said, you know what? I'm done with this hike. I'm not going to force myself to continue on this hike. This is not working. I'm being stubborn. I'm being, I'm forcing myself to do this when really my body is saying, this is horrible. This is just absolutely
I need to set some limits.
Yeah, my boundaries. I need to have
needed
some
your boundaries. Yep. That sounds accurate.
So
great application of our ego states.
Thank you.
Melody would be proud. I know I'm certainly proud of you.
Yeah, it's a gratitude and a learning experience.
Hey-yos.
Yeah, so today I was actually at a client site and I met another random listener. As
nice.
I was going around. I went to, and she was so excited to pull out her phone and show me her Spotify link. So I forgot to ask her if she was subscribed to our playlist, which we also have a Community Roots playlist.
Right.
But anyway, it was so fun. I always like when that happens. That's the second time that it's happened to me at work in Columbus. So I appreciate, the Columbus people showing up. So
absolutely.
Yeah, Lisa, if you're listening, thanks for chatting. I appreciate it.
Nice. A nice little shout out.
Yeah.
We're thankful for you, Lisa.
Exactly.
That's awesome. I would say that my gratitude at the moment is the ability to reflect and work with pacing, because I've noticed for myself, like probably for a while, I was like, boy, I feel really good and not too burned out and in a really great place. And here in the last 2 weeks, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to notice. So I'm going to say my gratitude is noticing, because I'm starting to notice of just like indicators might be going off for me of just, wow, I would love to have a little bit of space to, I've got this stack. If you all know me, as I've shared on Community Roots, I have this stack of library books that I don't have a need to read from cover to cover, but I do have a deep desire to just sit and explore, and even just parts of, quotes or things that I'm learning. And I have not had a chance. I've been doing great things, great activities for holidays and family time, and there's just hard to juggle that. How do you bring it back to, there's also time for me too, even if I'm doing my regimens of self-care and yoga and meditation and, quiet time or friendship or whatever. All these things are great things, but it's like balance and nurture and pacing and noticing. Those are all such great, great, great tools. And they're also a little like, I'm glad I'm able to notice. And then I'm like, well, now I have to be attentive and responsive to myself.
Right.
As a good reparenting to myself is to say, okay, I can't just keep pushing whenever my body's giving me indications, like you had said, Sarah, about your hikes in California. That's so awesome that you got to go on that vacation. I love that reflection that you had, and just how sometimes you have to slow it down. And we've tried to model that with Community Roots too, and our pacing.
We've taken a breath.
Yeah. And we took a season to kind of sabbatical a little bit, take a break. And I'm excited where we're at now. Maybe I can add this as a one last little gratitude of all our different segments that we've been brainstorming.
Agreed. Yeah.
I hope people enjoyed that. Unpack that. I want to do that some more. And, we're talking about this trail mix and coming out with some new things, breath of fresh air that we could do in between our every other week. Is that the name that we landed on, or did we vote on something
Trail
else?
mix?
No, the breath of fresh air.
Oh, I'm not sure where we're going to end up with that, but
I'm curious.
I'm excited. I love how, it's one of those things that just hits you with a moment of inspiration. But I wanted to say, I'm so glad that you had that gratitude, especially right before the holidays, because that's right where, those lines start to get blurred. And it's one of those phenomena whenever you're around people that for a while, you start to revert to some older ways of doing things. And so you might kind of forget in all of the craziness. And we also have holiday help episodes. Definitely check those out.
Yeah.
Those are helpful as the holidays come out. Maybe we can re-release some.
Yeah.
But thanks so much for joining us today. As always, I love doing this with Sarah and my mom, and I'm so glad that we're able to have listeners who can join us as well. You can
Thank
always
you.
reach us at Facebook or email us at communityroots.pod@gmail.com. Wanted to thank Steve Dodge for the theme song, Alexander Wells for our logo, Carrie Stratton for our social media. And this is going to be pretty good. So our next episode will be up after Christmas. Oh my goodness. After this, we're going to be, the days are just flying by.
Yeah.
But anyway, our next episode will release after Christmas, but we will see you then. Happy holidays.
Bye, everybody.